False alarm. Oh, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so where did most of the new immigration, where did they come from?
Southern Germany and Ireland.
Ireland. What was the industrialization and what was causing the famine?
Shortage of potato plants.
Yeah, the potato blight. And what was the anti-immigrant feeling? What were they called? And yeah, the nativists. What was their political party in the 1850s? American or? No nothings. Which, by the way, it was meant to be kind of an insult, but they kind of grabbed it. Oh yeah, you want to call us that? We'll be the know nothings. Yankees was an insult to make fun of colonists, and they, oh yeah, I'll be a Yankee then.
Yank.
And I've been called a Yank by someone in Britain. Made me laugh. I asked where we were running out of gas. We had to fill up our rental car, and I found a guy that couldn't find a petrol station because it's petrol there. Gas really doesn't make sense when you think about it, right?
Yeah, now that you say that, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
And so I said, and I was, you know, we're like literally on empty. So I ran this guy, and I said, you know where the nearest gas station? He looks at me and goes, Yank. I mean petrol. But he was pretty funny. Yank.
You always see like the TV do like you bloody Yank or whatever.
I wish they called me Bloody Yank. That would be
Bloody Yank.
But now maybe in another country they could have. I didn't know the language. Anyways, oh, and then so we got immigrants, and I totally forgot what else. What did we do? Else we do yesterday? Were you guys here? Was I here?
Talking about urbanization.
Oh yeah, urbanization. And now a big reaction, and that led to, oh, because we did the thesis statement yesterday too, didn't we?
Yeah.
We got that done good. And so urbanization, and what section of the country did most of the big cities form, and therefore most of the population? The north. You really saw, and that government's going to be stronger there because you got to make more rules when they're cities. It's just because people live on top of each other. And doesn't mean that's necessarily like government, but you know, people like or dislike it. It depends on what they do. So I went to urbanization, immigration. You have this real big changing of the changing world, and there are like 2 ants on my floor. No, that's Steve. Don't mess with him. What should I do about the ants? They put ant traps down, but they only work so much. These windows just don't seal. The ants can go anywhere. Leave them?
Yeah, it's not going to cause anybody. If they get close,
The ants are strong. If all of a sudden your death starts going out.
No, I remember when I saw Indiana Jones, and the last one. I forgot which one that was called, but they carry the Soviet guy into the anthill.
Oh yeah.
That kind of freaked me out for a while.
The answers, yeah. This is a good conversation. And here's the best part about this. We're recording this. So this will be saved forever.
Yeah.
So, class conflict. Let's get to this. Class conflict.
That was pretty freaky.
And this is from a magazine called Puck. It was a very satirical magazine that was actually really popular late 19th, early 20th century. But the class conflict between those who have the capital and those who don't. And this is a good one. I love with Monopoly. And I love how they draw them on a steam engine. That's very clever. And you notice it's late 1880s, the beginnings of phone lines and power lines. And here's a worker on an old mule, poverty, very clever, and showing this conflict. And of course, it's a little exaggerated, but that's what satirical cartoonists do. These are all the big industrialists, like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Andrew Carnegie. Okay, so the first thing we have to talk about are the Luddites. And the Luddites, this happened in England, but the movement would have a little bit of movement here, and it was a revolt by skilled craftsmen who felt insecure, which is an understatement, by these new power looms taking over their weaving jobs. So what we're talking about here is machines taking jobs. And this will become synonymous with fighting the new technology. So people are going to be called Luddites if they're like, I know people like, they're like computers. I'm just throwing something out there. They're called Luddites. They're followers of King Lud, who's this kind of Northern England fairy tale. And here they are breaking one of the power looms. And no, they did not succeed, but it's this idea of losing their jobs. There were elements of this in the United States, but it never really took off because of one simple thing. There's a shortage of labor in the United States. And with that shortage of labor, there's not as many skilled workers that worried about losing their job. And so that meant that by the 1880s and 1890s, when skilled labor started losing their job very quickly and having to accept much lower pay, it was kind of too late for them to really resist it. But I've been called a Luddite. And I remember it was once at a little thing we had to do, where they got out of school and were meeting, and this is over 10 years ago. And it was about online learning and how online learning was going to be such a great thing. And students would really like to be able to sit at home and do everything on their computer and get a lot more flexibility. And they just at the touch of their hand, they could research things. And I said, nah, I don't think it'll work. I don't think, first off, let's get to the number one reason. I didn't want to do it. So, it was selfishness. But also, I don't seem to like it. I think they might complain and whine, but they kind of want to be here. And and I think they learn more if they actually write it down and they're part of it in the social interaction. And I was called a Luddite for that. And as it turned out, I was completely wrong. I mean, you guys love it, don't you? That's me kidding. I don't think.
I was going to say that.
There's a few things that aren't bad, right?
There are some perks, yeah.
And it's better than not, it could be a lot worse. But that's one of the times I wish I could say purely because I predicted the future. I knew and no one listened. But I happen to be really right on that one. Huh? Yeah, so I have told people that. They don't appreciate that. You would think. So, but in the US, it took a different form. As capitalism began to grow, and don't forget, it's not immediate. I just really always think of two things, either a steamroller or a tornado coming. Gee, I wonder if the Wizard of Oz has something to do. Okay, moving on. But, yes, it does. Two views. There are those who felt left out. They thought capitalism was leaving behind or going to. They could sense it, that I'm going to be dependent upon this job, that I'm not going to have any freedom, that I will be forced to work in terrible conditions. And if there's a economic bust, I'll lose my job and starve. Now, this is actually a picture from New York City in the 1890s. But it's still, the effect of it. And there was such a housing shortage, especially affordable housing for workers. Pretty horrific landlords were renting out the alleys between their tenements to families so they could live there. And shortage of affordable housing for workers has always been a problem. It's crisis level now in the US. We don't see it as much because we live in Montana, but still, there's a shortage of affordable living place in big cities.
I mean, Bozeman's kind of getting there. It's like $650,000 for a house or something.
Yeah, people with wealth drive up the cost of homes. If you own a house, that's, hey, yeah, value of my house went up. But if you got to buy,
it's like $650 now or something like that.
It's crazy, yeah. Yeah, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law just bought a house in Denver. And it's a nice house, but it would be here, be a modest, decent house. And they paid $750,000 for it. And it'd probably be $250 here in Helena.
Yeah.
That's because, they bid up the price. So that is a problem. Then the other view of capitalism is those who felt, this is working great, or can work great for me. And we see the system as nothing but opportunity. And opportunity is going to be a word that's going to be used over and over again. Capitalism is creating all these new jobs and careers and money and wealth for people who have innovation, ingenuity, creativity, initiative. If they take the initiative, they can get rich. And that's why I put this picture of this bustling 1850 street. That's supposed to be New York City. And you notice two cities, right? It's both New York City. And here we have a street filled with commerce, all this action, all these new buildings. Some buildings are getting quite big. This is still pre-steel and pre-elevator, so they're not going to have that big of buildings. But this implies all this activity and creation and commerce. And therefore, if you just get on the right side of this and show some initiative and luck, you can become rich too. And these two different views are going to shape the country and are going to shape, this is the political system, because the political system makes the rules. Political system in the past makes the rules that affect us now. Which is correct, by the way. Is it a system that people are left out or a system of great opportunity? Both, isn't it?
See people with business startups, but at the same time, like their manufacturing job, like in a mill, and it ships off to China. Well, they're kind of stuck.
Yeah, they can't go to China or Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the point is, there are elements of truth for both. It's a complex system. Doesn't really depend on what, it's relative. Depends on where you're at that moment.
Yeah.
If you got a great job or started a business and things are going well, it's great. It's really, though it really shows how when you get a more complex economy like this, the ideas behind it and how to actually make it work for everybody becomes more complex. So here we have people who are left out. In fact, this cartoon shows the people who felt left out. They're going to have a name for this. And this picture shows, because this is from the 1880s, but it's got a treadmill, and he's working, so he's just working and working and working. And these are what he's promised. If you have obedience, patience, hope, promises. I'm sorry to shake. Hard to read. You know, insurance, tolerance, faith. You do all perseverance. You do all this, and you'll get the wealth. You'll get rich. You work harder and harder, and what does it do? You work harder and harder. You notice how the gears connected to him. You just get, this is the capitalist.
So, gotta be quick, you know, that State Farm commercial where the lady's trying to get like the $20 bill, and he's like, got me quicker than that with the fishing pole. Have you seen that one?
I don't think I've seen that.
He's like, got me quicker than that. She's like, oh, got me quicker than that.
I think, yeah, I think of the carrot, the stick, leading your mule along. But yeah, now I'm gonna look at the State Farm commercial.
It's like, got me quicker.
But it's a pretty common, you know, that's an old idea. And so this is obviously a very biased cartoon. And here it says, what fool these wage slaves be. We're not free workers, we are wage slaves. So these are the people who felt left out. They begin to call capitalism wage slavery. It's creating wage slaves. A few people are getting rich and they are teasing us. That's a good way to put, you know, that. Here you go.
Yeah.
You're teasing us with the money. And just one sec. I've not done that before. So a mouth really dries out, and it's hard to chew gum, but I decided to put half piece of gum in so my mouth doesn't dry out, which really has helped. I just spit the gum in the mask. Hey. The mask really becomes your own personal thing, doesn't it? So, they're wage slaves. Now, this is not that they're slaves, like the slaves that are going on in plantations. These are free workers who feel like they're being treated as slaves. And make sure you get that distinction. This is not slavery. Because I will ask you this on the test, and I always get a few people, especially as the year goes by, because this is an important concept. So these are people who feared the changes from capitalism, and at least early on, they would become members of one of the new political party that would form out of the era. In fact, as they saw it, they were the true Jeffersonian Republicans, and they called themselves the Democracy or the Democratic Party. And they would rally around Andrew Jackson. And the democracy. The workers need more power. They need the vote. Because most states, they didn't have it. It was starting. So the beginnings of the stay. And then we have another view. Well, they look at it as, you're not a slave. You're free. You're free. If you don't like your job, what can you do? Get a new one. Maybe you have a little bit of initiative, creativity. You can start your own business. You can be the capitalist. You can be rich. And if you have a job you don't like, whose fault is it if you stay in that job? Yours. It's your fault. Get a different job if you don't like it. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You're not a slave. You're not. It's not wage slavery. It's free labor. And by the way, if you see it, I'm just going to tell you, magazine is Puck. Just be careful with the letter. Well, free labor. And this is supposed to be a free worker looking over the New South after the Civil War. But I like this idea. That free labor, you show initiative, you can do it. So you're not a slave. So be very clear about it. It's not talking that they're not being paid. It's that workers are free in this system to have choices. Workers are free people. It's not that the labor is free. It's the workers are free. They trusted capitalism, and more at first, they become members of the opposition to the democracy. The traditional term for the opposition, they'd be Whigs. And they would be anti-Jackson. The Whigs have no real meaning. It was actually a horse thief. And that'd be the opposition party in Britain. We've talked about the Whigs before. They just adopted it. And it's hard to have a party name that says, I hate Andrew Jackson. It doesn't fit on the button. So it's just Whigs. And remember I told you about laissez-faire capitalism? Which was don't mess with competition, but government aid for business. Laissez-faire capitalism would be the economic policy of the Whigs. So do get that down. Laissez-faire capitalism, that's Whig policy. Now, by telling you this, it doesn't mean that from all time then Democrats will be the party of working people, because that's not what happened. Slavery would blow everything up. And pretty soon, and it blew up the Whigs too. And the Democrats would become the party not only of slavery, eventually, and didn't start that way. It would also be the party capitalists would start joining the Democrats, which seems to be totally opposed to this by the 1850s. And a new party would start called the Republicans. And then the capitalists would switch to the Republicans in the 1870s. And so these parties have complex histories, but this is the root of it. And so, back to workers. They felt very insecure in this new situation. And I think you understand why. Workers were insecure. Individual worker felt many times, even if they liked the system, they felt at mercy to the capitalist. And so, here's the important thing, economies of scale. Remember economies of scale. In any economic activity, the big have the advantage. Well, a single worker has no power compared to those who have the capital. They have the power, don't they? You have the machines, you have the power in the relationship with one person. They got to come to you for a job. And that is why workers, more and more, and this actually is an old idea because of economies of scale, come together. One worker, no power. All together, unions, power. Trust me, the capitalists, whoever has the capital, and this is certainly an understandable thing, they would like to keep workers disunified. If workers aren't unified, they don't have power. So they got to come to you for jobs. And so here it's supposed to be the workers fighting against capitalists, and eventually they come into an agreement. But the problem is they always have the same issues. And so what did unions want? What were the issues that unions would fight for? So unions would fight for these. I put it on a different sheet, but this is what the unions would want. These are the four basic issues. The wage system. Profits go up, but it does not directly affect wages. Machines became more important than people. We've talked about capital. It's not your skill that matters, it's the machine. So you're devalued, you're just a number of one of the many workers instead of this individual, which is pretty demoralizing. I'm listed as one FTE, full-time educator, instead of a person. Working conditions. These machines are incredibly dangerous, but to make safe working conditions is a cost. There is an incentive to keep things unsafe because it raises profits. And then job insecurity. The thing about job insecurity was the workers could lose their job potentially at any time. And so the thing is, even if you work hard, it might not matter. Hard work could be potentially irrelevant. If there's a bust and an economic depression, as it would be known as by the end of the century, companies aren't selling their goods and they'll shut their doors. And it doesn't matter how hard you work. If they're not selling their products, you're fired. That's insecurity. And so the workers are dependent, the insecurity is they're dependent upon the capital. And as monopolies now become more dominant, I mean, there are fewer and fewer small businesses of people trying to do it on their own now. It almost never happens. It's, I mean, you notice it in Helena, there's not as many shops as there used to be. Of course, I'm older, so I remember. Go to small towns and go to the downtown. It's sad. So the whole thing is about control then. Control over the worker's life, control over the company, control over capital. Who has control? And for obvious reasons, the capitalist wants to maintain control. The worker wants more control. And so that's what we're fighting over. Unions want to maintain control. They want some control for workers. And how they do it is, if they unify together and come up with a contract for all workers, so all workers will be guaranteed a certain pay. So this goes outside the wage system. And I should add, pay is more than just wages. A vacation day, that's pay. That's pay. Beginning in World War II, but the 1950s it became much more common. Health insurance is pay. Part of my pay, it's nearly $1,000 a month, goes to health insurance. That's pay. I'm paid this. And by the way, it is a little frustrating. Instead of getting $1,000, I get health insurance. So I can't use that $1,000 to do things like save it, invest it, buy a gold gilded toilet seat. I can't do the things I need. Yeah, you understand, right? This is called collective bargaining. And no, it doesn't always work, and it's very difficult to do. And I've tried to do it. I did it once, and I hated every second of it, trying to work with collective bargaining because I'm just not good in meetings. So you need people who can do those kind of things. But that was a while ago, almost 20 years. And the thing about collective bargaining is they come up with a contract for everybody. I'm in a teachers union, and so there's a contract that all teachers have. There are a pay scale that every teacher with the same amount of experience and education were paid basically the same. We have certain rules, like for example, I cannot be made to do things outside of school hours. I can't be made to do things on weekends. Doesn't mean I don't, but I can't be made to. And things like that. And yes, I do work at home all the time, but they can't say you must, do something. And so that's control. And part of my pay is, I have a pension. Do you know what a pension is? I take less pay now, but then I get when I retire, I get that back. I get a percentage of my pay when I retire. So it's an old age pension. It's pay. And that is through union. Now it's actually, union used to be really strong in Montana, so it's state law for teachers and government employees. Most people don't have that anymore. A lot of problems. There's some good things and bad things about being a teacher. That's a good thing. And here are textile workers. Remember I talked about the Lowell system? And they're striking for collective bargaining. I love this. American ladies will not be slaves. Deserves a fair compensation. And you can imagine how employers hate this because they need the workers in the factory. And if they don't agree to collective bargaining, what can the workers do? What do if the employers won't negotiate? Strike. Deprive them of their work, they can't run their factories. They even took labor unions to court. In the 1830s, when the first court cases came out about this, they said unions was a cabal that was illegally trying to restrain their trade. And in Massachusetts, the court case was Commonwealth versus Hunt. And it said that labor unions can collectively bargain. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, this is only Massachusetts. Well, it set the precedent for other states because Massachusetts was having the Industrial Revolution before anybody else in the US. Now, it did not mean that labor unions are going to be legal. And wow, are companies going to fight labor unions? No country in the world is going to have a more violent labor history than the US, where companies will use every means possible, including armed thugs and the police and something new called the National Guard to stop labor unions.
One time, did the United States government bomb some revolt in Kentucky or something?
West Virginia.
Yeah, the miners revolted and they sent in bombs and stuff.
Yeah, they actually used the Air National Guard of the brand new Air Force in World War II. It was called the Mayfield Coal Mine Wars. World War I. Yeah.
I thought I heard that somewhere that we bombed our own coal miners.
Yeah, we did. And why? Because coal mining was really dangerous and they wanted higher pay.
Yeah.
And so, with that, the early union movement, though, had a lot of problems. The first way they thought they could do it is let's form our own political party, a working people party that was part of the Democratic Party at first called the Local Focos. And I'm so sad they didn't make it because that name Local Foco is awesome. And this is the Local Focos, and this is supposed to be a Tammany Hall politician, and that's a meeting hall where the leading Democrats met. And they're trying to say, we want more working people. But by the 1840s, and a lot of it because of slavery and economic panic, this fell apart. And there's never been a successful working people's party in the United States. The Democrats were close at this time. That would come away, and then the Democrats were as closest as the U.S. would ever become to having a party for working people. It was a working person's party in many ways from the 1930s, the New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt, up until the late 1970s. And then it became more and more a party of elite and moneyed interests. The Republicans were already that party. So both parties are pretty much controlled by money. Yes, there are differences, but they're both getting their influences from the same places. And I see some shakes in that. I see that maybe the Democrats look like they might be going away from that a little bit. The Republicans are, at least rhetorically, are trying to be more of a working people's party, even though their programs aren't necessarily that way. But they're really trying. I mean, it's noticeable. You can see it. So we'll see where it's going to go. See, this is really exciting times. Aren't you excited? It was so boring, and there were no depressions. It was just so boring when I was your age. So but the problem was they're so uncoordinated. They never had clear goals. The early labor union was always pretty shaky. And remember, the capitalists fought them tooth and nail. Literally tooth and nail. And so with that, Paul McCartney, this is in Winnipeg, Canada. 1919, they had a big strike after the war too, the same time as that coal-field war. There were two different options that early unions had. Should we fight the wage system, which means potentially anti-capitalism, which is pretty risky, and it's not really clear what you replace it with. Or the other movement would be, okay, capitalism is here to stay, let's just fight for higher wages. Anti-wage system, higher wages. Because this implies we want more control over the capital. Here, we accept it. Just give us better conditions, better wages. Now, wages include like vacations, your health care. That's pretty funny when I tell my friends in Germany can't believe how we don't have guaranteed vacations. They just can't believe that. When they get 8 to 12 weeks of vacation every year. Paid vacation, yeah. It's a different thing there. When my sister-in-law was pregnant in Berlin, or had her baby, for over a year, not only she got paid that time off for maternity leave, paid 100%. Also had a nurse come 2 times a week to help her with anything that might happen and check her health 2 times a week for the entire. They're very pro-family.
Don't like dads also get maternity leave like in those?
And so he did take it, but they had the choice, and so it was her.
There's no such thing as that. There really is maternity.
We have for 9 weeks you can get maternity or paternity leave, but you don't get paid. You just guarantee you won't lose your job, technically. We don't have, and there's really no health care with that. So with that, but one of the things that's going to come out of this, and you see this very close to the idea of anti-wage system, would be a new movement called socialism. And socialism, there were utopian movements before, this idea of living together, share and share alike. In fact, the Mayflower Compact from 1820 was very socialistic. But socialism would really develop as a reaction to capitalism. And so this was done, you could see it happening in Britain. In fact, they would be called levelers at first, level the classes. And in the US and other places. And this is another reaction. And what they saw, capitalism was creating 2 distinct classes. Now, there's always been classes. Upper class controlled land and the workers, there's classes. But capitalism, it was much more stark, more wealth created, and by whoever controlled the capital, they had the profit. And they were living on top of each other in cities. And so what they said is this is creating such inequalities and making life so miserable for those on the bottom, which is, of course, once again, that's relative, isn't it, depending where you're at. They want a classless society. Now, socialists do not want everyone's equal. They just want no difference between upper and lower class, or at least very little difference. And so we're talking a classless society, where the idealized for socialism would be that everybody is relatively equal. And I should add, I didn't put this down, as they saw it then, this would be perfect democracy. And so write this down. And now we need democracy, just small d democracy, where the workers would have power in politics and economics. And so it would be the socialists who would want, the workers' right, want everyone to have the right to vote. It would be the socialists who would lead the anti-slavery movements. It would be socialists who would lead the movements for equal rights or between the races. It would be socialists who want equal rights for women. In fact, we'll get to the 1960s and the people who are opposed to civil rights. You see all these pictures of civil rights, or they'll call it race mixing is communism. And Martin Luther King was a socialist to attack him. He actually was a socialist, but that's another story. But that's classless society. And so they all agree that the workers need more control over the means of production. Remember, the means of production, that's capital. Now, here's where we get to the problem. Define control. One moderate socialist said, hey, let's just put the rules in place with a stronger government and labor unions to make sure that it's more equitable. Some said, hey, you have capitalists, they're always going to be corrupt. Let's get rid of them. In fact, there's other ones who said, hey, capitalists they're going to fight back. So we need revolution. More and more, they're going to be called communists. They're a form of socialist. And then the most radical one said, the whole thing is corrupt. Blow it up. And perfect socialism will come in its wake. They're anarchists. And so that's one of the things about socialists. They have a lot of different ideas, and this will definitely weaken socialism to this day. Because, of course, if you're going to attack socialists, wouldn't you say all socialists are anarchists? They're going to blow everything up. yeah, that's really hurt. They actually never work, they never unified. In fact, if you want a better argument, argue or see an argument between different ideas of socialism. I think they hate other socialists more than they hate capitalists. It's pretty fun. And so, but that's not to say they're not going to have great influence. Who's that guy right there? Karl Marx. He would lay out much of the philosophy, at least the critique of capitalism out, a couple different books, but the most famous was the pamphlet he wrote with a capitalist by the name of Friedrich Engels called the Communist Manifesto. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later, but this is from 1848, the year of revolutions. And in it, he laid out a critique of capitalism that very much, or that said this is creating more inequalities and will lead to a horrific, as he saw it, a potential horrific dictatorship, or the capitalists just buying off enough of the workers to keep the system going. But anyways, some of his critique on how capitalism was working, really solid economics that virtually all economists agree with today. His solution, it's a little hackneyed. Revolution, perfect socialism. I don't think it works that way. If you have a revolution, it's not like all of a sudden people are going to come together and say, okay, it's over, let's group hug and everything's perfect. There'll be a lot of resentment and maybe a civil war.
People want their own ideas.
Yeah, he thought the workers would have a dictatorship. And then when people were ready, go to perfect democracy, perfect socialism. So you have some people who will be the dictators. The problem is, if you let someone be dictator and they have all that power, what do? Keep it and become dictators. That's what happened in this place called, you might have heard of it, the Soviet Union. They talked a good fight about workers' rights and what did they create? A totalitarian dictatorship. There's the old Soviet flag. Get the hammer and the sickle, workers' hammer, farmers' sickle, and they just created a totalitarian state. But we already mentioned they're really divided. So with that, we're not going to do the Marshall Court rulings because we've done these. So we're coming to the Jacksonian era, the last thing for today. Today's Friday, isn't it?
It is.
What are they going to do for Thanksgiving? I think we're, not next week, but the week after. They're probably going to do like Monday A, Tuesday B. Have you heard?
I imagine. Kind of like that whole short week that we had.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, still rolling. They gave most of your lunch. The Jacksonian era. And the Jacksonian era, yes, it is technically different, but it's all part of the same thing. The Industrial Revolution is what led to the Jacksonian era. And it becomes really easy to kind of put them in compartments or themes. You're like, we did now business, and then Andrew Jackson and new politics, and then like slavery, and then expansion west. They're all interrelated. Do that. Try it, people. Come on. You can't cheat.
I can't.
See, we tried that once before, and your pinky doesn't work. Here, let me wrench it a little bit.
You gotta get it.
Kind of.
It works that way. Yes.
One side's getting it, the other's not really getting it.
This would be another one. This would be great if somebody walked in. What are you people doing? This is the honors class. Okay, so to working people, to small farmers, many of them, people who felt left out, they thought Jackson as the man on the horse, the leader who will protect them from the capitalists, from the wealthy elite of the big cities who are the bankers and hold their debts. That's what they saw him as. And Jackson, who was from very humble means, poor, it's upside down, isn't it? He was poor. He hated entrenched wealth. He hated those who inherited their wealth and became rich, as he was an orphan. So he despised people like that. He was their protector. And yeah. Or to those who saw him as a king who uses the power of those commoners voting to rule like a tyrant and stand on the Constitution. King Andrew. And so the Jacksonian era is going to be personified by this man. And Jackson is really hard to nail down today because there's a lot of myths about Andrew Jackson and a lot of things that he did. He did some bad things, but many of the things about Andrew Jackson that are people consider bad are actually how the Whigs portrayed him. The Whigs made up a story about him and people remember that, which is unfortunate because this complex man should be better understood. So the era of good feelings. Okay, this is review. Remember we talked about this one political party? But this hid the fact that the whole thing was blowing apart. And I showed this election of 1820 to show you how, boy, it doesn't look like they're all Republicans and all happy. Only one voter for John Quincy Adams, so Washington would be the only unanimous choice. But it hid huge disruptions. What were these disruptions? So, wait a minute, this is review again. So we didn't write this up. We have this new economy. All these changes are happening during that time. And things happened during this so-called era of good feeling that showed that things were not unified. First off, we have, once again review, the Panic of 1819. And then, what? Industry was the first one to industrialize. That came a little bit later. Textiles. And if textiles manufactured, what do you need for textiles? That's two things. Cotton, and who became more valuable than ever before, and they didn't think it would happen. Slavery. And like overnight, what they thought would happen was different. This new and potentially scary economy and relied upon slaves. And it's going to blow up to near civil war during the middle of the era of good feelings. And on that happy note, did I give you your reading assignment? Let me put it up. Oh, I forgot to put it on the board. Don't forget, go and see your lunch out and get started, but don't forget on Teams. I always post, and I'll post it up for this week. I always post the schedule. I'll do it tonight after school. And I always put that up. Jackson's his name's Old Hickory, so we're starting it. 4:43 to 4:48. I always put it up every day. This will be up. I usually do it the night before, or at least in the morning when I get here. I try to get it done early. And then on my webpage, the Partridge Post, there's a calendar with everything for the week. It has copies of everything we do. It also has a link to my YouTube page. So I'll download one of the classes today and put it on YouTube. All right. That's all. Enjoy your lunch. I'm shutting this off. Goodbye, everybody. Right when you find one.